I'm Ed Bauscher, and welcome to the latest London South East CEO interview. I'm joined today by George Roach, who is Chief Executive of Premier African Minerals. It's a natural resources company focused on Southern Africa, and it operates in Zimbabwe and Mozambique, and it has investments in Namibia and Ethiopia. So, George, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you indeed, and it's my pleasure.
Great. Well, I know you've got a broad portfolio of assets, and we're going to look at that portfolio in just a minute, but I'd like to start with the biggest piece of news flow you've had in the last 3 months, which was your placing last October, where you raised £1 million from shareholders. So why did you decide to raise some cash last October, George?
Indeed, we did, and it was very successful and very well supported as well, I may add. The reason that we did it was there were legacy issues going back to the last couple of years in Zimbabwe, during which there'd been a fair accumulation of debt. And through the placement, partially, through various conversions that we effected at the time, we've brought PREM to a point where it is now cash positive and debt-free. So that was one of the reasons. The other fundamental reason that was very important with this is that it brought on board an expanded body of shareholders who were keen to see that Premier changed its focus to an extent and expanded its view a little from just Zimbabwe, but into high value, other metals, gold in particular, and so on. So it was intended to support that movement as well.
Okay, well, we'll come back to Zimbabwe in just a moment, but let's start with Mozambique. Your assets there include the Ligonho gold project, I know. So what's the attraction of Mozambique, and what's the attraction of that gold project in particular?
Well, let's start with Mozambique, and let me just mention personally, I'm very comfortable with Mozambique. I've spent many years working in the country, so I think that we have a good understanding. And the Ligonho Gold Project was acquired as a tenement package that we purchased sometime last year from an Australian entity. When I first visited this, I was very pleasantly surprised at the extent of the artisanal activity that was taking place on the tenement. The tenement itself is relatively small, but is clearly highly prospective based on what we saw. We're in the fortunate position, we believe, of being able to expand our footprint in Mozambique, not just into neighboring properties to this tenement, but also into other areas in the northern part of Mozambique that have extensive active artisanal gold activity on it. So I'm quite excited at these are relatively new areas, but very prospective and looking very interesting.
But we're a fair way from production in that Ligonho gold project, aren't we?
Oh, indeed. Dependent, of course, on a lot more exploration work that we're going to be undertaking in the early part of this year, and also, of course, on the size of the operation that is planned and the recovery and process methods that are employed. Those are things that I really can't comment too much on at the moment. So yes, it is a little way away, but this is surface and potentially open pitable. So there are some interesting factors that could expedite it.
Now, I know you're primarily an explorer, but you do have some early stage production exposure, and that's primarily in Namibia, isn't it? And you've got the Ochizondo Manganese project. You own 19% of that. Tell me a bit more about that project.
Sure. Just let me give a little bit more background to why we're involved there. And that is that it's become obvious to us and very clear that we needed to have a cash generative asset somewhere. We couldn't really continue with the ongoing dilution that we had been put into as a result of the suspension of the RHA project in Zimbabwe. So we looked elsewhere, and Ochizondo was suggested and proposed to us. We have acquired a 19% stake so far. The operators and owners of Ochizondo have made it very clear that they would like to see that PREM's involvement is extended and so on. We're looking quite carefully at them at the moment. I've got independent auditors looking at their financials. We've done some other independent technical validation and site visits. I'm not quite sure where that's going to go at the moment, but as I say, just to repeat that the operators and owners of Artisanal have made it pretty clear what they would like to see happen. So we're looking at it.
So how much cash could it generate, that project, do you think, in the near future?
That's one of the reasons why I've got reporting accountants there at the moment. I need them to understand that, to come back and tell me exactly what it has generated and exactly what the distributable profit is that relates to our 19%. So I'm quite keen to get those numbers. I don't have them yet. They are clearly operating and they are clearly profitable, however.
But the plan, if all goes well, as I understand it, is you've raised £1 million last October. You're going to have cash coming in from Mozambique, and that should mean, all being well, you won't need to raise any more money in the near future if things go well. Is that fair?
I get very nervous when asked questions like that, because I don't read the future too well. Obviously, we would like to see that if there is to be further dilution, that it does not necessarily relate to direct operating expenses within PREM. I think that related to profitable acquisition, for example, highly prospective tenements, gold tenements, I think that's a little bit of a different story. But as I say, I can't really be drawn on a future dated or future related statement quite as broad as that one.
No, fair enough. That's absolutely fair enough. Now, you mentioned the RHA project in Zimbabwe. You've had some other projects in Zimbabwe as well. In some ways, that's the core of the company. But as you also said, things haven't gone quite as well as you might have hoped at one point. Was that primarily down to political problems?
You know, the country risk profile associated with Zimbabwe has made it particularly difficult. And a good example of this is we have a substantial lithium deposit, in respect of which we've completed a scoping study as the price of lithium was a couple of years ago. All looked really good. And this was a high-grade hard rock spodumene deposit. Very good test work results, tantalum credits that would go with it, etc., etc. And then with a combination of falling lithium prices, but more particularly country risk discount that our auditors wanted us to apply, the scoping study, from being a very profitable and really good-looking one, didn't look quite so good anymore, and largely associated with country risk. Now, with what's happening on lithium prices at the moment, and then allied to that, the fact that we've had an application in with the Zimbabwe government for a couple of years for an exclusive prospecting order, dramatically expanding the area of this Zulu lithium deposit, with hopefully that being granted soon, with some reduction of the country risk, with improvement in the lithium prices, that project is beginning to look really exciting, and I think is going to be something that we will be able to unimpair fairly soon. So I'm excited about that. And then the other project, of course, in Zimbabwe is the RHA Tungsten project. The history's been widely reported, but in summary, the National Indigenization Economic Empowerment Fund owns 51% of this project and has not adequately and equitably contributed. When we ran into difficulties with dramatic reductions in tungsten pricing a few years ago, and to give you an example, from around about $450 a metric ton unit down to right down to about $130, $140. It was a huge drop. It wasn't really profitable, potentially possible to operate that mine profitably. So it's been in care and maintenance, but things have also changed there. There's some new technology. We're busy doing some new test work. It's possible that that could come back into production and come back fairly soon. We have approaches from multiple offtake partners wanting to assist in funding in bringing this back into production. So again, we wouldn't be asking shareholders to fund us. We'd have outside people funding it. And I think subject to the test work that should finish later this month, results out early February, I think there's interesting potential for RHA Tungsten as well. So I think if I may just say that I think things have turned around a little in regard to the Zimbabwe exposure, and allied to the change in strategy that we have, where we, as I mentioned, looking for some of these higher value gold assets and so on, that with this change in Zimbabwe, allied to that strategy, and then potential cash generative assets, I think it just changes PREM completely.
So you said we might get some news flow on RHA Tungsten next month. Is there any other potential news flow that we could be looking out for this year?
Well, the other big dramatic potential news flow relates to the status of the exclusive prospecting order in Zimbabwe. And that's been nearly 2 years in the making. We know of no reason why this should not be granted. We anticipate that it will be, but it hasn't been yet. So I think that's a significant news item. RHA potentially. Some of the new licensing in Mozambique on gold tenements, and possibly some other gold tenements as well. So that's kind of where I think the best of the news flow really is going to lie.
And just quickly, really quick summary. What about your investment in Circum Minerals in Ethiopia? Tell us about that.
Circum, it's a small percentage in a big cake, as it were. It's a potash project. The main operators of Circum Minerals are busy revalidating their original definitive feasibility study with a view to reducing capex and trying to bring this to a liquidity event and or into production. But I think everybody's mind is set on some kind of liquidity event associated with Circum at the moment. We are a minority shareholder in that. The extent of the communication I get isn't always great, as most of our shareholders know, but we do expect to have some decent reporting coming out of Circum probably in the next 4 to 6 weeks, as their validated DFS should be available.
So plenty of news flow to watch out for. So you've got exposure to gold, tungsten, lithium, and potash. Is that right? Have I missed any of the metals there at the moment?
Yeah, there's a bit of tantalum on the side, and
Brilliant.
manganese, obviously, and manganese is performing very nicely at the moment through Ochazondu. I think we've all seen the manganese prices moving up again. So yeah, I think that there's an interesting broad exposure, and I think it's significantly mitigates a lot of the risk that we have previously had, the position we're in at the moment.
George Roach from Premier African Minerals, thank you very much for joining us on London Southeast today.
Pleasure indeed.